Welcome to the KEI Network's introduction of Project Canada 51. Thank you for joining us at this pivotal and historic event. Through this webinar, we want to explore a topic that is as bold as it is transformative: the proposition for Canada to merge as the 51st state of the United States. This initiative that we've titled Canada 51 brings us to the table of one of the most significant geopolitical discussions of our time, and I'm glad you're joining us. Our aim here in Canada is not to arrive at a conclusion, but rather to open a dialogue, insightful, spirited, and yes, even a little outrageous at times, while remaining steadfastly civil and forward-thinking. We've asked the network, you and others, to establish what should guide our discussions, ensuring that every perspective is heard and every concern is addressed. This conversation, and I want to keep on emphasizing the conversation, the intent to make this a journey, not a conclusion, transcends borders and politics. It touches on our identity, Canadian sovereignty, and our vision for the future. For some, it may symbolize unparalleled opportunity. For others, and probably many here today, and certainly those who have been reflexed and responded to me immediately, it may raise questions about a threat to our values and traditions. Whatever your viewpoint, opportunity or threat, your participation here today is invaluable. I am grateful to have such a diverse group of participants, each of you bringing your unique insights, emotions, and expertise to the table. Through your engagement, we hope to foster an atmosphere of collaboration and curiosity and mutual respect. So let us embark on this journey together, questioning, debating, and envisioning what could be a monumental moment in North American history. So without further ado, let the negotiations begin. May they be insightful, dynamic, and ultimately impactful. And so the position that I took is that if you want to have a conversation with those of us in Canada, as that letter implied, I want to talk about 13 maple leafs on a flag, one for every province. I want to talk about every province being considered for statehood, in which case every province gets 2 senators, and every province gets proportional representation at the House of Representatives in terms of population, which would give us 16% of the seats in the House of Representatives. Now, you want to talk about that, maybe you want to talk about tax relief for a few years. There's a number of things that one could talk about that might be interesting to hear the suitor address to the muse, that might make this negotiation a little more interesting and maybe open up something, maybe not a marriage, but extending a courtship. So does anybody want to jump in with something that may well have come to their mind about grounds for this to be a threat, grounds to be an opportunity, or just pose a question to the group?
Sure, Perry. What I expressed to Perry earlier today on this topic, and I've remained silent as the emails have been going back and forth. I've been really feeling conflicted about it because I'm loath to negotiate, especially with someone who is so adept at moving the Overton window. What Trump does is he normalizes things that have never previously been seen as normal, and so that's the gist of what I expressed to Perry. There's a part of me that just wants to shut this conversation down entirely, and I'm very, at one level, offended by the notion of Canada being just a single state. And I'm glad Perry highlighted, the reality that we have a vast and diverse population, regionally distinct. There's no bloody way that you could shoehorn a country like Canada into a single state. So that's kind of in a nutshell how
and I think that echoes why the U.S. has as many states as it does, is those states were individually, not just historically, distinct in many ways, culturally, location. I mean, if you want to talk about one of the distinctions in the U.S. is whether you're on the coast or internally, whether you're red or whether you're blue. In the U.S. is almost a byproduct of whether you're coastal or not. And I was thinking that if the U.S. and Canada were to come together, there are those in the U.S. that are anxious about inheriting a lot of liberal perspectives. But the west coast of Vancouver Island and the east coast of the Maritimes are quite liberal. But you get internal to Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and even eastern BC, and you've got a fairly conservative, what you might say, red, Houston-like perspective. So yes, we do have diversity, and some of it actually echoes the sentiments of the South. There are
Yeah.
differences. I mean,
Yeah.
absolutely no question. I think that's what most people zero in on. And I was hoping through a series of chats such as this, we might elevate just what is Canada anyway, other than not the US? What is it that makes us distinct and different?
I say too, Perry, that there's been discussion in previous years about the not the east-west variations, but the north-south alignments. I mean, you could make an argument for Cascadia, British Columbia and Washington State and Oregon and California aligning psychologically, culturally, etc., in the same way that a lot of the central states would align with Alberta and Saskatchewan. And like on the East Coast, you have a lot more in common. So that actually, you could find a kernel of an argument there for some alignments, but that's a really different proposition than Canada just becoming a 51st state.
Many in the US just don't even know who we are. I mean,
Yeah.
it's all well and good for us to have this conversation because we have some idea who we are, but it's humorous to learn. And when I was hitchhiking into the U.S. one time, going through Niagara Falls, there was a couple that I met that really didn't know where Canada was. Maybe it was my accent, I don't know, but there's a lot to be learned in a discussion or a negotiation like this.
The planet ends at the 49th parallel if you're an American.
Go ahead, Alona. The point I was going to make, there's a lot to be learned in the U.S. about what Canada is and who we are besides nice and hockey. Uh, my parents, all they knew about Alberta was the source of the Alberta Clipper. We brought the cold weather. That was our defense system, was the cold weather. That was to keep the U.S. out, the cheapest defense system in the world. Go ahead, Alona.
But I want to go back to something, and that was James Lee Burke's novel, uh, Blood on Every Flag or Flag Under Blood. Anyway, great novel. And it was from him that I learned that Canada was known as the land of the grandmothers. I mean, grandmothers are important. And, we speak that language of the grandmothers.
I just saw a comment that with global warming, we may lose the value of our defense system being cold weather. That's in a way the spirit of what I was hoping. We as Canadians may well show the US is we can take some of these things and roll with it and play the same game too. You want to play the game of 51st state? We'll play the game of 62nd province becoming a 62nd state. You want to talk about stars? We'll talk about maple leafs on the flag. You want to about 13 provinces? There are 13 stripes. They're not just the original colonies. They're the new provinces. I mean, there are many things that can make this thing a skit, almost impromptu. And I think sometimes we react to the U.S. with we're so reflexive about the bully because of size and power and the bad manners. But we can show good manners and have a lot of fun with this and maybe come out with some advantages where people actually understand better who we are, why we protect our sovereignty is what in fact does make us different. The newsletter last week cited the degree of violence in the US way overshadows the degree of violence in Canada. There is a fundamental difference in itself. And the reason why in the forecast 2025 about these negotiations, it concluded no way USA on the basis of only one negotiated distinction, and that was the degree of violence. Go ahead, Eric.
I don't mind. Like I look at this as basically the president was trolling, and he was basically looking for opportunities, and that created a whole bunch of chaos, and that was, I think, his point. Is this a serious proposition? Well, it depends on whether there's an opportunity. Now, from my point of view, I don't particularly want to join the United States. I like doing business there. I do a lot of business there, and however, it doesn't resolve our problems. Becoming one One state doesn't resolve our problems that we have as Canadians, so it would just make our issues worse.
Yeah.
And so if we look at becoming another 13 states, and if our problem is with our federal government, well, then we're changing the types of governments. But I think the thing that really comes back to it, if we're dealing with bullies, you don't really want to respond like in kind. If you're dealing with an adversary, you want to mix it up, you want to do something else. So we don't do tit for tat. We want to do something else. We want to find a different way to make fun of things or to approach this, because and that's the same argument with tariffs. There's a bunch of, oh yeah, well, we should do tit for tat tariffs. Well, that makes absolutely no sense from my perspective, because we're going to hurt more if we do tit for tat. We need to do something else to express. And if you perceive them as a bully, then you do something else to fight a bully.
You're talking
You
about,
don't do what's expected.
you're talking about style. I mean, I was alluding to the fact, when a suitor pursues the muse has a choice: slap him in the face, find a friend. Hell, maybe we negotiate with Russia. You want to open up the border discussion? What makes the U.S. just because it's proximate our only possible? There are so many ways to play it out, and that's really what I'm wishing we can do, even if it's just for purposes of entertainment. Though it's conceivable that we derive some interesting points that can be shared with others, and actually influence how we respond and what we have to respond with. Go ahead, Alan.
I'll bring in a different perspective. We've had the discussion before. We'll have it again. I won't foreclose any future possibilities, 50, 100 years from now, or anything else. But in the sense of the moment, to grab at it, I like the idea that the topic has arisen. And if apart from the order of magnitude difference in attendance, because we'll pay a lot more attention as Canadians than Americans will to this discussion, nonetheless, if we could capture their attention and get a bit of education on Canada right now going in the US, I'd be all for that as a very positive step forward in terms of where we are when we have the need to know more about each other. So that would be a point number one. A point number two, in terms of the practicalities of getting together, we do have fundamentally different philosophical approaches, and that would take some time to work your way around, obviously, between the two countries. A third aspect would be, if we were going to go into a new arrangement, I would want Canada to be coming from a stronger bargaining position than it is right now. To me, it's not enough to have a lot of resources to be able to sell to the US as a reason for getting together. So we'd have to be doing a lot more maturing in terms of where we're going with our future in the economic basis and so on. But I'll go back then, and I'll turn it over to others, but I'll go back to my first point, that I like the idea of this topic having arisen. I'll give Trump credit for that, maybe not many other things, but I'll give him credit for that. And I hope Americans start paying attention to Canada so we can learn a little bit more each other. And if we do, I think what we'll find out is that for those in the US who have already thought about it, it's a very desirable arrangement we have right now with Canada as a neutral country on the northern border. We can be very helpful to each other in a lot of ways, diplomatically and otherwise. So I like where we are right now. Thank you.
I think you've hit the nail on the head when it comes to the value of discussion as an educational process of bringing the two parties to a point where they better understand one another and decide along the way what the nature of that relationship can be in a positive sense. I think the second point was echoed by a lawyer who I was in touch with this week. It says the complexity of the legislation in the US and the complexity of the legislation in Canada would make this a long negotiation or a long process, even if there was an agreement to go to a second phase and begin to do some work on some very specific issues. There's a lot of complexity. That doesn't mean it can't be done, but it does indicate there's a big hurdle there. I think you're absolutely right. The strengthening of the relationship is almost guaranteed in a discussion of this nature, unless someone gets belligerent. And I was sharing with Jeff a view this morning. I wonder if NATO would step in, because this would trigger one of the articles if he did use some terms other than economic annexation or economics strength. But people will parse the words. National Post had several pages today devoted to a word or two that he may well have muttered, which indicates the degree of sensitivity to, quote, the bully, as opposed to simply a negotiating position to open up a discussion that may end up being win-win for both parties, which is what I'm trying to do, or what we're trying to do with this type of an event, is to envision how could this end up win-win, which is what you pointed out, Alan, of just getting to know one another better.
Well, as a background, just to throw an additional comment, I've long had very happy relationships with the USA. I grew up in Penticton, BC, 40 miles from the border, and used to go back and forth as a young fellow. So, and in those days, you could just flip across the border. I'm talking about the 50s now. And in my subsequent career, my education, I was taken in by the US. I got a superb education at MIT on my way to the doctorate. I've had the affiliations with people all over the US, very good friends, working relationships. I've had involvement in scientific affairs in a lot of ways in the US. So I am one who's been truly blessed by being a Canadian and accepted totally in the US.
I'm wondering if we shouldn't suggest trading Ontario East for Texas, California, and Hawaii.
And why is that? What do you think the advantages would be?
Well, a great place to go for vacation with same currency.
Currency. Now there's an issue. Would amalgamation bring about a single currency and bring about a better balance instead of that distinction? Go ahead, Jeff.
Oh, I just wanted to catch up on some of the comments in the chat, Perry. Is that okay to do, or do you want to carry on with other?
Suppose the point that you're seeing there you'd like to raise.
Oh, there's just a few things. I'll just recap a few comments for maybe spark some further discussion. Trudy commented earlier on that there's no way Canada will become part of the USA, nor do I want to see Alberta become part of the USA, Alberta being its own sovereign nation. Brad, I think, was in the airport, and I think his flight is about to leave. He said, "Love the discussion topic, Perry. Thank you. Wish my flight was delayed. Words never to be repeated, so I could properly engage. We'll listen to the recording. I hope the group can sit in exploration to contemplate both pros and cons, as there are both rational and emotional."
Okay, let's stop there just for a minute, if you would. I'm going to come back to Trudy just for a second, because Trudy took a position as opposed to why or what might be done to modify that position. Why is it that you feel that we should remain sovereign and we don't even want to, and we want to tell them right off the bat, no?
Yeah, Canada is got its own uniqueness, always has. Americans throughout the world are known as being arrogant and self-inflated. So Canada is known for being, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, but we're much more diplomatic, I guess, as a culture versus individuals. But yeah, being part of the United States would not solve any of Canada's problems. It wouldn't solve any of the US's problems. It would just complicate both. I think it should have been taken as a joke, what Trump said from the get-go, and just left at that. So I'm sure that was where this whole thing started from. Not sure why Greenland come up in the conversation, but as far as there's some people in Alberta want to see Alberta become a 51st state. I would not want to see that whatsoever, but I do support the idea of, like the one gentleman said, anything east of Saskatchewan and west of Alberta could, you know, join someplace else, or we could.
Okay, so you've touched on one of the negotiating points, or if someone were to say, look, we're prepared to have negotiations that are regional. And we recognize that Quebec might want to have a unique role, just as Nevada has a unique role. And Alberta, given what Alberta has, might want to have a unique role versus BC. I mean, considering that each province has and brings something unique, just as Canada brings something unique, uniqueness, Californians are not the same as people in New York.
Mhm.
People in Montana are not the same as people in New Jersey. People in Canada in each one of its provinces are not necessarily the same as one another. So being culturally different or having different styles is in itself real, but is not necessarily a reason, given our passion in Canada for inclusivity. Go ahead, Wes.
Okay, well, thank you, Barry. And it's really kind of interesting to be able to talk to you for the first time. And full disclosure, I was an MLA for Alberta at one point in time. Here at the last time was 2019. And so I had a lot of opportunities to have conversations, coffee shop conversations. This has been going on for a lot of years. And it goes back to what Trudy was talking about. Do we now look at Alberta sovereignty, look at ourselves as a sovereign nation first, before we look at even attempting to go towards working with the United States? These are the conversations I heard time and again in the coffee shops. Alberta, I think we should be going down the same road that Quebec is, showing that we don't really need to have Ottawa telling us everything that we have to do, because we're really, frankly, getting the short end of the stick. So, like I say, mine's are more for observations that I've had with people. My opinion is, yes, we should first look at sovereignty within Alberta, perhaps becoming our own country. We would be one of the richer countries in the world if we did that.
Okay, so Wes,
Yeah.
what has emerged here is not foreign. I mean, we as a country
Yeah.
have experienced some of this in our relationships with Quebec, and we resolved it. Maybe it'll emerge again. And certainly Alberta and some of its distinctness makes it an obvious candidate for looking at the relationships that we have with the federal government and asking whether or not there's really fair play, and if not, what can we do about it? What's interesting in the US has had the same experience. The states' rights issue was a major issue back in the 50s, and I can recall that the energy and the volatility of the discussions about federalism in the U.S. was raw. I think that type of discussion is underway. It's percolating in Canada of whether or not we should be viewed now as a more mature country, and as a mature country be granting more rights to our provinces than what we have. That is very much a product of the evolution of democracy in many countries. Is as they mature, as the populations get larger, as law and order becomes more fundamental, as some of the distinctions between the various jurisdictions are to be dealt with, states, and in this instance, provinces, and might be one of the things we could potentially gain as an opportunity, is just the discussion around provincial versus state rights and whether or not we would be, as citizens, better empowered and our voices to be louder. Okay, Anita, your turn.
I see this as an opportunity, the whole discussion. I mean, Trump said that because he pokes holes at, pokes people when he sees a weakness. And we talk about, if they get to know us better, they will see that we're different and this and that. Be careful what you wish for. What will they find out? Well, I just think it's an opportunity here for us to improve ourselves. I mean, we talk about, being a trading nation, and yet our largest port in Canada is the Port of Vancouver, which is at the bottom of the list, second last in global efficiency ranking. and I don't see any initiatives to improve that. The other thing, and we talk about defense, we've been trying to build 2 supply ships for the last number of years. The most recent report from the government is, well, they're coming in 2027 and they're going to cost way more than we thought. And what kind of a defense is that when we can't even build supply ships? I mean, I don't know what they're actually building that's so technically challenging, but that's pretty pathetic. And I don't see anything going on in the Arctic that's keeping our sovereignty in the Arctic. So, I mean, he's pushing some buttons, but, he kind of picked a few that are actually, yeah, I think thinking Canadians would say there's some issues there. So I see this as an opportunity. I don't intend to become an American, and I think that's going to be pretty, difficult to do. But I think as Canadians, somebody has pointed out some pretty big issues here. And I really think, and I'm hoping, that the governments at all levels will take this as an opportunity to get rid of some of the bureaucracy we have and improve our productivity and improve some of our, come up with some solutions to some of our problems, faster than we traditionally have been. Nice Canadians who kind of put up with everything. Well, I just don't think that's going to work anymore. Okay,
Anita, have you ever given thought to taking up politics? You've echoed a sentiment that appears to be emerging generally in this discussion of people feeling that talking about something is an opportunity for both parties. And it doesn't have to lead to consummating a relationship. It can simply result in improving it for both parties. Go ahead, Aslam.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I do agree that I thought it was a joke first, but on self-reflection, I think it's a good opportunity for us to take a look at, as Canadians, where we can improve. My concern with any discussion with the US or going down that path would be that, we have some fundamental institutions like our healthcare system, okay? And are we willing to degrade that to the US level, okay? Now, people always argue with me and say that, there's no wait lines there, you can get whatever you want quickly and so forth. But that's for the rich, If you look at it from a population health perspective point of view, okay, among the Western countries, US ranks last from a population health perspective. US ranks first in per capita cost, okay? And so we talk about our high tax system and so forth. If we wanted to maintain our health system the way it is, very shortly, our taxes would double, frankly speaking, just to maintain the elephant's payment systems or the insurance systems for healthcare there. The second thing that worries me is the gun culture. Okay.
Which is the violence, which
is the violence. And you talked about that a little bit. And so
by the way, just to pick up on that for a moment, then I'll let you finish. The gun violence in the U.S. is 50% of that is suicide. Yes, the gun culture in the U.S. or the degree of violence, whether it be public violence in the form of riots or private violence in the form of suicide, is clearly a distinguishing characteristic between the U.S. and Canada. Go ahead. Any further? Have I interrupted you?
Yeah, no. I think I'll leave it at that, and I'll listen to others and come back.
Yes. Go ahead, Brett.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say that from a U.S. perspective, from the gun violence perspective, it's clearly shown that there's a mental health issue in the US. Like, people aren't getting treatment, and that goes back to their healthcare issues. I think with Robert Kennedy and some of those guys, they're going to clean up a lot of those healthcare issues. I've been looking at it a little bit recently, and it's basically there's a lot of folks inside the healthcare system that are making it unsustainable in the US, and it's fairly easy to fix. The Canadian healthcare system is probably a little more of an issue. I think where this whole thing started out is a negotiation point. I think, Trump has always been known as sort of an isolationist. The thought of bringing on Greenland is because of all the precious minerals that are up there. But frankly, if the US and Canada kind of set out on something like the EU and bring in Mexico into that, it would solve a lot of problems in regards to access to get projects done. We cannot get a mine going here in Canada. In regards to our environmental issues, trying to get, just get stuff going. And you also, maybe if they go to a North American currency, it settles the US's $33 trillion debt problem and our $1.2 trillion debt problem. You can make a lot of that go away with a single currency.
Well, that whole issue of balance of payments, which we could spend a whole webinar on just what is it? Is it 200 billion or is it 80 billion? Whatever it is, what is causing it? And the primary contributor to that imbalance, which doesn't seem to be appreciated, at least he, and you know who he is, doesn't seem to understand that trade balance is basically because Americans keep on buying Canadian goods.
Oh yeah, there's a trade imbalance there right now, but I'm talking, yeah, you would eliminate that. I mean, frankly, just the trade barriers that we have between provinces is sometimes worse than what we have trade barriers to the US, right? So
there are numerous things that entering into negotiations is not just entering into negotiations with the US, but Canada getting its own freaking act together in order that it might negotiate and come out better itself, regardless of what the end result of that relationship is. So in that regard, maybe I should say thank you, Mr. Trump, for inviting me to Mar-a-Lago. I've got a lot of things I'd like you to say or talk about. Go ahead, Eric.
One of the things when you bring up the EU, I'm not sure that the effectiveness of that model has been proven out. You look at the UK response, you look at where Germany is now, you look at where France is. There's a lot of discussions about whether that really works as well as they had hoped for. So I'm not really a big fan. I'm a very big fan of free trade, but I'm not so enamored with the closed off trading blocks, which is what you have with EU. So doing the same thing that doesn't work well in Europe, doing it in North America, doesn't seem like a great idea to me.
well,
Let's do something effective.
yeah, I mean, your difference there between the EU is you had England or the UK, which, had a decent economy, and you had Germany. The rest were kind of, they kind of supported the rest of Europe, those two major economies. A little bit of France, but for the most part, the rest of the economies were a basket case. With Canada's resources and US being the world superpower and Mexico's capability to manufacture, I think it would be a different scenario in North America.
Let me step in there and take a similar but maybe slightly different perspective. Yes, Europe is different. I mean the cultural distinctions and the history of war and animosity between nations. There's a lot to be dealt with in Serbia and Herzegovina and Germany and France, and so we don't have quite that issue in North America. The War of 1812 was hardly a war, but yeah, we can call it a war, and certainly in the Niagara Peninsula they remember. But we don't have a lot of the features in North America. And in fact, what we do have is we have an example in North America already where the coming together of states worked, and that's the US experiment. Is 50 states are working together, each one of them quite different from one another. You look at Montana compared to California, and yet they're all sitting in the House of Representatives, they're all sitting in the Senate, and they're having discussions, and they're addressing regional issues together. We have in Canada a very similar mosaic. I think that the idea of states, forget the boundaries together, we have a different configuration of states and a different set of issues in North America that make it more likely to be able to get around. We really haven't had animosity between the two countries. We've had NAFTA agreements, and yes, there are itchy issues and there are imbalances. By the way, that trade imbalance is quite unique. It has only averaged 40 billion. And it's quite obvious who's got the resources shipping what way. We're shipping a lot more into the US in the form of energy than we're consuming in the form of finished goods. So is that a problem? I mean, you tell an industry that we're going to shut off the importing of goods from Canada, and they'll blow up. So I'm not quite sure how much sympathy there is in US industry or among Americans in the know about fixing that trade imbalance, because the first way to fix that trade imbalance is to just stop buying what Canada is selling, which means telling Americans you can no longer have what Canadians are giving you. That would be a problem. Any more hands up? Well, go ahead, Dawn.
I watched a very interesting podcast a little while ago. I don't know if others have seen it, with Pamela Wallen on her No Nonsense podcast, and she interviewed Diane Francis, who a lot of you will probably remember has been a pretty good journalist, right? And the two of them had a great discussion, and Diane mentioned a valuation she did years ago along with some other people. And they did it was like a corporate valuation, but on Canada and the United States. And the valuation came out with Canada on top in terms, because of all of our natural resources and development potential. And I thought to myself, what we bring to the table along with our social conscience, I think, and you team up with the United States, with the economic potential there that exists, and the entrepreneurship that seems to run in their veins, and more willing to take risks. And I thought to myself, well, you've got a really dynamite combination there. In the two countries, of course, we've got this great trade history as well. And as we're discussing, in fact, we get along quite nicely. But with regards to language, I might just add that, English is the international business language. And why complicate things? Why don't we just, focus on that? And I think we've got to sometime take a look at the cost of French in this country. When you think about labeling and how you've got to produce things in two different languages, sometimes it's very costly, right? For 18% of the population.
That if you were to get into serious discussions, would America accept French on their cereal boxes?
They have lots of Spanish on their cereal boxes, as Dawn is referring to.
They do. So one of the distinctions has historically been that US is a melting pot and Canadian is multicultural. I don't know how significant the differences are, but it would appear that the way we deal with immigration and the way they deal with immigration may be a sticking point, but it's certainly something that would need to be addressed. Is how do we treat immigrants, and what are the expectations?
I'm not in favor of joining US, so I have some other reason, but I would like to see what is the main intention that Trump want Canada as a kind of like another state or something. So I think his main intention and reason is a kind of pushing China back from the kind of, in terms of the economics, or from the backyard of the US. That's one of his main reasons. He wants to be a kind of make America great again. So for this, he doesn't want a kind of competitor close to him. So that's I think main reason that he wants to have Canada as a kind of another state, or like whatever. So, but I mean, it would be better if we go talk to Trump and see how we can kind of resolve this issue, or how we can help him in this regard. So but I feel the economic reason, tariffs, or like the borders on security, they are somehow excuse that he tries to make. His main reason is just like pushing back China.
Okay, so 2 points there. One, I mean, Alona has made the note that the Chinese built the railway, but that wasn't China. That was individuals. So yes, we have a sympathy for the Ukrainians and the Chinese, and
yeah.
Even when Americans are here, it's okay. We are actually more of a melting pot than we seem to realize. But on the point of defense, it would seem to me that what Trump really is up to, and I'm expressing now my personal view, is that he wants to uncomplicate defense in this global world we have, with China rising and seeing our northern border, which is literally undefended, and saying this is a vulnerability. is Canada may well be taking advantage of the fact that it is under the umbrella, but is not contributing by even allowing or establishing a defense on its northern border. And I think that's the same game. I mean, Greenland may have minerals, and so does Northwest Territories, and I know that well from the work I've done up there that have remain unmined. I mean, it's a big mining territory, but the defense of that border has always been of concern in the Niagara Peninsula. And it was Joe Clark that explained to me why we spend $2 billion a year as a country on the Northwest Territories is because of the issue of concern with sovereignty in the North. But we're not allowing the U.S. or working with the U.S. on how to protect that border. That would be a negotiating point, and probably something of value, again, that Canada could offer in any negotiation. When you pay, you give us this and we'll give you that. David, go ahead.
I just wanted to make the point that we have in this country a number of indigenous nations that have themselves have treaties between themselves and the crown. And so Canada, the country, is probably not in a position to negotiate changes in the sovereignty of those independent nations unless we, like the Americans, take the heavy-handed approach of just saying, screw you, we don't care, we're going to do whatever we want, our agreements don't mean anything.
But you don't have to, I mean, that's not the only option Canada would have. The option that Canada would have is to bring them into the discussions.
They are under no obligation to agree to enter into this.
I'm enthused of the array and the tone and the civility of this discussion, and a recognition that almost unanimously was expressed today of the value of learning from one another by talking about what we have in common, what we have different, what we might do better together. That is so heartening, because some of the initial responses that I saw to my newsletter and my invitation was a hiccup of no way, Jose, no way, USA, without any explanation. And those explanations are important because they do tell us something about why we value our sovereignty and how we are in fact different and are unlikely to consummate. On the other hand, it's conceivable that some of those differences may in fact be resolved either in terms of an agreement in the extreme to merge, or an agreement to be nice or be better. The intent of that conference would be just as it is today, to simply give people an opportunity to have an airing. I'd like your viewpoints on whether or not we should go public. Do you think this issue is important enough to also had an overture from Calgary that if we do it in Edmonton, they'd like us to do it in Calgary as well? Comments? Yeah, go ahead, Yogi.
I think it would be an incredible discussion that will build on all of the themes that we've heard here today. But I'm struggling a little bit with what the goal would be. Is this a memo we would want to send to Trump or Trudeau's successor, or talking points for the premier? What would our goal be?
I'll keep on thinking about that, because I think that is a point of discussion. It's one to have an introduction of a topic. It's another one to have a discussion and draw some conclusions. It's a third to derive recommendations and decide who takes action. It may be viewed as simply an educational process, but it may have an end result that does have the capacity to have influence. I think it's a little bit premature to proclaim that we're going to do this to change the nature of Canada or the US. But that may well emerge. I don't want to be so brazen as to proclaim that that's what the end point is. I think that would be, we would be entering into politics too early. I think right now it's fun, it's educational, it's building a network, you're getting to know one another better. I think those are sufficient objectives for starters, but that may not be the end point. Now that I'm expressing my view because I'm putting my neck out on this. So Yogi, I appreciate your asking. So what's the end game? Right now, the end game is education and awareness. There may be another end game that someone might, and I want to be careful about someone not taking advantage of this. It was expressed to me early on, well, why don't you take this idea to one of the parties? And I said, because that's not what this is all about, and I don't want this to become politicized.
I just think it's a great, it just reminds, having a session like that reminds me an awful lot of what Danielle Smith is doing right now. Sometimes I think this woman should be the Prime Minister of Canada. She's going down to the inauguration. She's going to have some conversations about how these two countries can best work together, and it's so refreshingly different from some of the other stuff that we hear about, I mean, she's a real stateswoman. And she's going down there in the spirit with that entrepreneurial spirit, that Alberta has, and we all love so much. And she's got that same sort of attitude. Let's see what we can do together, because
Well,
we've got a substantial amount here to work with.
okay, this was paid advertisement time. There are those who today, if you mention Trump's name, will immediately turn away from you. There are those in the province who have political viewpoints that make it very difficult to raise the role that a politician might play today to help address a current issue without it all of a sudden becoming politicized. Because as soon as you do that, the other party is going to say, well, we're the loyal opposition, we're going to fight you. I don't want to go there.
Barry, I think the point of your proposed conference is to promote open public conversation on difficult subjects. That is the goal, and that's paramount today.
That was the introduction. That was the point. And I think most of you that stayed, and almost all of you did, which is a sign that whatever we did as a process was not offensive. We weren't taking a position. We were instituting or initiating a dialogue and a discussion for enhanced awareness. And